Hello and welcome to episode 389 of the official EstablishTheRun.com podcast. My name is Adam Levitan, as always joined by Evan Silva. And today we are joined by the translucent one, the fearless leader of the spreadsheet versions. He's single-handedly keeping Microsoft Excel in business. It is the king of the small field nosebleed stakes DFS streets, our own director of analytics, Mikko Leone. How's it going, buddy?
It's going well. I'm getting pretty amped up to defend the spreadsheet virgins up against Mr. Manly Landscape, Evan Silva.
Evan, how's it going this afternoon?
Yeah, I'm always excited for this one. Actually, driving back from Cape Cod or driving to and from Cape Cod, I drove right by Leone. Next year, hopefully we could hook up, maybe get some lunch or something. But yeah, it was a little, there were some revelations yesterday from you, Adam, especially that you're now doing psyops for the People's Republic of China on TikTok. But it does look like the U.S. government is going to do something right for once and get rid of TikTok, hopefully for good.
Buddy, we got to go where the kids are, okay? The kids are on TikTok, all right? We're going on TikTok, yes. Hopefully you all have seen our TikToks. It's so outrageous. But anyways, I thought you were going to say when you said you drove through Buffalo, I thought what you were going to say is hopefully next year I can stop at Leone's house and mow his lawn for him.
He's paying people to do that. Don't worry.
Okay. On the next two shows, we're going to play a game of man versus machine. Silva, of course, will play the role of the man, the one who plucks his own weeds, the one who evaluates offensive line play with his bare eyes, the one who grinds the tape. Leone, on the other hand, will play the role of machine, aka one who spends his days solving life's questions in Python, running regression models, one who pays another man to mow his lawn. Yes, I will preside over this debate. And of course, a lot of times, man and machine are going to agree. Actually, they mostly agree. And we'll go over some of the interesting agreements there as well. Before we get into it, have to remind everyone the show is brought to you by our friends at Underdog Fantasy, undoubtedly the smoothest, highest stakes, best user experience for anyone trying to play best ball. Use promo code ETR when you sign up for $100 matching deposit bonus. And of course, you can upload our rankings directly onto Underdog if you desire. Also, we're just absolutely grinding our cocks off to make our 2022 fantasy football rankings for all formats the best they can be. We have our entire team looking over every decimal point in the projections, baking and sealing cases, suspension risk, injury timelines. It really is an incredibly massive undertaking. Our rankings for all formats are in the draft kit. Check it out. All right, boys. Let's start with one of the biggest discrepancies that we found here. Mark Ingram, Evan has 99th overall. The machine, Leone, has Mark Ingram 212th overall. Let me just give a little background here before you go ahead, Evan. Alvin Kamara, the details on Alvin Kamara's thing is not pretty. And there's a surveillance video out there. I haven't seen it. I don't think anyone's seen the surveillance video yet, but I feel like the tides could change on Kamara if that video gets out. The allegations don't seem great for Kamara. Pro Football Talk, Mike Florio had a report out last week that he thinks, or based on what his reading of the CBA is, it's likely Kamara will get 6 games at a minimum. We don't know when that will be, though. Kamara's lawyers could push that off for a while. So with that as the backdrop, Evan, Mark Ingram, very high, 99th overall. Go ahead there.
I don't think it's very high for a guy that has a potential to be the Saints starting running back for the first 6+ games. A report came out from Pro Football Talk recently that Alvin Kamara is bracing for a 6+ game suspension. The actual wording was at least 6 games. You look down the depth chart, you've got Dwayne Washington, Tony Jones, Devine Ozigbo, borderline NFL players. You have a chance right around pick 100, according to my rankings, to get a guy that could be a starter behind a solid offensive line in a solid offense that is getting back Jameis Winston to be an RB2 for the first 6+ weeks. Now, I know that Mark Ingram is not sexy at all. It's kind of gross that I have to rank him this high. Maybe I should drop him down a little bit, but I know for sure that Leone needs to move him up.
Yeah. Well, one thing I think that's hard, Leone, and when doing things from a more math-based perspective is we have no idea, how do you incorporate the range of outcomes for Alvin Kamara. Alvin Kamara could play 17 games. He could play 0.
Yeah, I mean, it's extremely difficult, and you're trying to, somewhat mathematically account for the missed games, but then just qualitatively also account for, if he misses 4 games at the front end of the season, how much does it matter when we know we want to wait the playoff games a little bit more? But if it's a range, if he starts missing 6+ games, your odds of making it to the playoffs are a lot less, and the risk of, the role when he comes back starts to increase. So it's definitely a difficult spot with Kamara. We've recently dropped him to, I think, in the 40s in our ranks, which is behind ADP just until we get some more news. So I get why Evan's high on Ingram, because he's right. The depth chart behind Kamara is atrocious. There's nobody there, but I'm just always really nervous about feeding guys volume simply because the depth chart isn't that strong when they could bring somebody else in. And, I mean, we're talking a 33-year-old running back who's coming off some of his worst years ever in yards per carry, one of his worst years in a long time in yards per target. He doesn't have Sean Payton there anymore, who really loved him and brought him back last season. So I think it's really risky that someone else could beat him out, even though the depth chart looks gross. And also, if he's the starter and he's decent for 6 games, that's great. But I have a hard time seeing him being productive in the latter half of the season when it becomes a little bit more important.
Yeah, that's fine, and I wouldn't mind moving him down into like the 120s. But I do think he's a solid 0 RB target. Because I do think he can just give you points like 12 to 14 points a game early in the season as you try to work the waiver wire to find a stud. We know that Mark Ingram at this age is a poor bet to last and be effective. But I do think early in the season, I mean, that's when his legs are going to be the freshest, and he can give you a level of production. I'm fine moving him down. I'm going to move him down. But you need to move him up, though, Mike.
Mark Ingram will turn 33 in December. And, even if I knew Kamara was for sure out for 6 weeks, like Leone said, I'm not convinced that Mark Ingram is going to be effective in this offense in his almost age 33 season, coming off a year with 3.5 yards per carry. They lost Teron Armstead. There's other holes to poke in Ingram beyond just the volume concerns. And I agree that at the running back position, I mean, you could sign anyone off the street. I mean, and they could come in and take carries from Mark Ingram. So yeah, glad we got to the bottom of that one. Okay, let's go to the 49ers. TDP, aka Tyrion Davis Price, the 3rd round rookie out of LSU. Evan, we talked about him with Josh Norris on the last episode. Hopefully you guys caught that. So we know most of your take here, Evan, but you have 98th overall. Why don't we let Leone start off this time? 180th overall on TDP, Tyrion Davis Price. Leone, that struck me as low as well. Go ahead on why the machine has TDP 180.
Yeah, I think it's a pure upside bet, but I don't see the floor case here at all. I'm interested to hear Silva's case for the floor, but I'm just worried that a large percentage of the time, this is an absolute 0 for Tyrion Davis Price. I'm not convinced he'll be ahead of Jeff Wilson, particularly in passing down situations as the RB2. It seemed like Shanny absolutely fell in love with Elijah Mitchell, really from day one last year, but down the stretch, they just rode him like a true workhorse. And I think it's going to be an offense where Trey Lance can take a bunch of carries. If Elijah Mitchell has somewhat of a workhorse role, I think you're really dependent on injury for Davis Price to give you value. And there are certain drafts. I just wrote an article, looking at the landscape of your home league. It's a little bit early, but you always want to keep that in mind. And in certain situations where I just want to stash upside on my bench, I'll draft Tyrion Davis Price, ahead of where we have him drafted, ahead of some guys that have a bit more floor where I don't care. But in underdog and best ball leagues, you definitely do care about that weekly floor to a certain extent.
Evan, go ahead on TDP. I know you made a big case with Josh, but go ahead.
Yeah, I mean, I agree with Leone in terms of the complete lack of a floor for Tyrion Davis Price. But, every year there are only really a handful of guys that swing season-long fantasy leagues, and I'm looking for upside with virtually every pick that I make, not for floor cases, especially when I start to get into 8 rounds, 8, 9, 10. And this dude right now is going in the 14th round. So where I have him right around pick 100, I'm way above ADP on that, but that's because I believe that he has a ton of upside. I think the 49ers have a chance to lead the NFL in rushing attempts this year. Yes, Trey Lance will play a big role in that. I really like Elijah Mitchell. Clearly, last year, Kyle Shanahan really liked Elijah Mitchell. But Elijah Mitchell, coming out of college, profiled best as like a Raheem Mostert, 12, 14 touches per game as an explosive, almost a change of pace back, a committee back who can hit big plays. We didn't see him hit as many big plays last year because he had to be like a volume workhorse grinder. And I don't think that's the best role for him. And I think the reason that they drafted Tyrion Davis-Price is because he's 225 pounds and he can be a workhorse back. Everybody's going to throw it back to Trey Sermon. Last year, Trey Sermon, they blew the pick. I mean, the guy's he runs like a fullback, And Tyrion Davis-Price, I think that they see as a 1-for-1 upgrade on Trey Sermon, who I'm not even sure is going to make the team. So I think that there is that chance that Tyrion Davis-Price, and we talked about this in the Slack, I would say around 40% chance that he leads the 49ers in carries this year, and the 49ers could lead the NFL in rushing attempts. Leone is falling victim to the hive mind on Twitter.
Dude, I'll give you plus 150 on the spot. I'll give you your 40% implied probability on that.
It's because he wasn't rated highly in like draft Twitter circles, and Leone gets all caught up in that as opposed to looking at the actual situation.
No, Amico likes him. He's our prospect. I do think you brought up Trey Sermon, and I don't think there's I think he's probably dead, but this is one of the things when you're doing projections, you're thinking a range of outcomes. Right. Like we have like a 5 to 10% chance he's not completely dead. And that's, that factors into things. Like that's a big deal when you're, I
don't see a scenario where the 49ers don't think he's dead. And then they go and draft Tyrion Davis-Price.
Right.
Like they drafted Tyrion Davis-Price. They know that Trey Sermon is dead.
Trey Sermon was the guy when they traded up and got him last year. Like they could, maybe Trey Sermon comes in camp. I'm just saying things change. Like they could be wrong. They were wrong on Trey Sermon last year. They could be wrong on Tyrion Davis-Price this year. And then maybe I think you have to bake in some probability that he's not completely dead. Once he is completely dead, the math nerds will bump him up a little bit further.
Let me say this. I think part of the disconnect here is managed versus best ball. In managed, where after 3 weeks, let's say I take Tyrion Davis-Price in the 12th round. After 3 weeks, it doesn't work out. I'll just cut him. It's no big deal. I'll cut him and I'll start churning the waiver wire. That's not an option in best ball, right? And so to me, like these very low floor, high ceiling picks, and I agree with, I actually tend to agree with Evan that they used a 3rd round pick on this dude and they think Trey Sermon is total dust. I think he is in love with Eli, but they're going to use multiple backs. I like taking shots on TDP in the 11th or 12th round, but not as much in best ball. And I think it's important people to understand
there's no question. And this even goes back to Mark Ingram, that there's a disconnect between what Leone and the approaches that we're taking, because I'm full season long redraft right now. Yeah. And I know that Leone's out here doing, 100 underdog drafts a day in best ball. I'm out here mowing the lawn and pulling the weeds. All right. So there's absolutely a disconnect there, but I do like the hat though. McNutt landscaping. It looks good on you. I need one of those.
Yeah.
I had to psych you out for this show. Come in. Look at these sweat stains. I've been putting in work.
Yeah. But also, I would highly recommend checking out Leone's article on the differences between best ball and managed, because, it is really important, and people just don't understand the subtleties, and I think that's important to note. But Leone, for the purpose of this discussion here today, you are talking about your redraft ranks.
Okay. I'll have them a little bit further for pure redraft, which I kind of touched on in the article I just put up on site, but it's not. I mean, you can't.
Like I'm straight. I don't think about,
too high. Top 100 is too high.
Yeah, like especially from like let's say pick 75 on. I straight up don't think about floor cases at all when I'm doing my top 150. Like these are guys that we were taking with Trey Sermon in like the 7th, 8th round. You just dropped them after a few weeks and you moved on.
Yeah,
like that's how I think about the players from let's say pick 75 on. And that's where I have Tyrion Davis-Price. Just I don't think about the floor case.
I know. I'm interrupting the video. Wah. But if you're enjoying this video and want to see more fantasy football and DFS content like it, please just take 2 seconds, hit the subscribe button, hit the thumbs up button. Really does go a long way for us, and we'd appreciate it. Thank you for watching, and now back to the show. All right, let's go to the Packers pass catching situation. It's hard, man. It's thin. I don't like a lot of the guys that they have there. One guy I certainly don't like that they have there is Sami Watkins. I'm not sure Sami Watkins is a lock to make the team. I mean, maybe he will, and he probably will, but I don't know, man. Evan, 148, Machine, 225 on Sami Watkins. I'll let Evan go first this time. Go ahead on Sami Watkins, Evan.
Yeah, and I'm not even sure that this having him in the top 150 where I have him right now at 148 with the last few guys in the 150, I'm just putting in guys that I can build an upside case for. And again, not thinking about floor at all. I don't even think this aligns with my tier rankings, but I just at the last few picks of the 150, I'll put a backup running back that I like, or a veteran wide receiver playing with a back-to-back MVP quarterback. And that's what this is. I don't know that Sami Watkins is going to make the team, but in this pick range, I don't care if he doesn't make the team. I can drop him and go get somebody else, and take a flyer somewhere else. Sami Watkins is, the number one veteran receiver, or at least, the most productive receiver from a career standpoint. He's only 28 years old in the Green Bay Packers receiver core right now, other than Randall Cobb, who we know is very limited. So with Aaron Rodgers, we know it's all about trust and building that on-field chemistry. And if he builds that with Sami Watkins, then I think we can get, a decent number of usable weeks out of him. And so that's where I stand. I kind of just jammed him in to the end of the top 150 just to have him there.
Yeah. My concern with Sami Watkins is they needed him in Kansas City. They've needed him in big spots before, in good situations, and he's just been incapable or
when
unwilling.
He came through in the Super Bowl?
The Super Bowl, yes. He did have a good game in the Super Bowl. Go ahead, Leone. You're way lower than Evan on Sami Watkins.
I am.
But why do you hate the Super Bowl? Why do you hate the Super Bowl, Adam?
I've been badgered by the rest of the projections team on Sami Watkins to an extent. And Mikko's giving it to me, Jack and Adam, and we got a whole team working on this, and we try and do this together to come at the best answers possible. And right now, I think that the hard variable is what are the true odds he gets cut? Because sometimes there's a report he might get cut, and I felt like people are running with that as if there's an 80% chance he gets cut. I don't know what the true odds are. I do think there's actually a little bit of a ceiling case, so might move him up some. But he's someone that his ranking is going to swing, pretty big in one direction or the other once we start getting a little bit more firmer reports on just is he going to make the team or not? Because if he makes the team, I think there's a target case you can make for him that you probably can't make for Allen Lazard. Maybe I'm off there, but I just don't see, Lazard ever being a certain amount of target share. Whereas Sami Watkins, I don't know, this is sort of his last chance. I think it'll be his age 29 season for the most of the year. I don't think he's total dust, but we'll find out. So
I just think he's always been more name than game, always. People like clicking him.
That is true. I mean, that's true. But, we can look to James Jones, late career revivals with Aaron Rodgers. Great quarterbacks do great things.
Speaking of Jones, let's go to an old friend of the show, Ronald Jones. I couldn't believe this one when I saw it. I mean, Evan's been so outspoken about not liking Ronald Jones' game, and now he shows up with Ronald Jones, 87th overall, the machine. Leone has Ronald Jones at 160th overall. So I'll go to you first, Evan. Have you changed your mind on Ronald Jones?
I mean, I've always been right about Ronald Jones. So why would I stop being right now about Ronald Jones? But no, I mean, a lot of the, the explanation for being down on Ronald Jones just never made sense that he would hit with Tom Brady in particular, because dude can't pass protect. Dude can't play in the passing game really at all. And Tom Brady just wouldn't trust a guy like that. He has ball security issues. I think they'll be a little bit more lenient with that in Kansas City. And it's throwing a dart, although I'm being it's sort of an aggressive dart at this point. What do I, 87 overall? Is that correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, it's a little aggressive, but I mean, we've seen Clyde Edwards-Helaire just has failed time and time again. They're still kind of messing around with guys like Jerick McKinnon, who, as he's never been able to stay healthy for a sustained period. He's given us really nice stretches, but he's never been able to stay healthy for a sustained period. Ronald Jones has been able to stay healthy, is in a high-scoring offense, and we know that he can run the ball. I mean, he's absolutely an NFL caliber runner, and I think he's the best runner on the Kansas City Chiefs. And I really like their offensive line too, by the way. You remember we were critical of their offensive line in the first half of last season, as we should have been. It really coalesced, came together down the stretch. Now they're bringing it back, full continuity. I mean, they're going to be able to run the ball this year, and they don't have Tyreek Hill. I think they might run the ball a little bit more this year than they have in years past.
Yeah, Leone, I've been taking Clyde Edwards-Helaire pretty aggressively, and I haven't been taking Rojo just for the pass game stuff, but the McKinnon stuff spooked me a little bit. What do you think about Ronald Jones' ranking?
Yeah, I mean, sometimes there might be a little bit of a hole in how the projections work where we undervalue some of these guys that just don't have a pass catching ceiling. Part of the reason why we're a little bit behind on Tyrion Davis-Price, but also on Ronald Jones, where he's not going to have a pass catching role no matter what. So it's like, what are the odds he becomes the primary 2-down back, and how much is that worth in this offense? And I just think at top 100 overall, you're missing out on guys like Ramondre Stevenson, Devin Singletary that have a little bit better floor ceiling combination than Ronald Jones does. And I'd almost rather take a dart on Jerick McKinnon later in the draft because he does have that pass catching upside. So he's just going too early for my taste. He is an awesome pure rusher, but they also got Isaiah Pacheco, a rookie there that's got some big playmaking ability. And if I'm taking a guy like Ronald Jones, I guess I just want to be really, really sure that if he takes over the job, like it's going to hit. And I just don't have that confidence level that it's going to hit. Like it could be someone else, even if CH gets hurt. He's not going to catch passes no matter what happens. So it's not the type of bet I want to make in the top 100.
I'll say this. We've seen the Chiefs go out of their way to like play guys ahead of CH. Like if it goes to training camp and Ronald Jones beats out CH straight up, that wouldn't be like the most shocking outcome ever for me. And that's as a guy who likes CH. But I mean, that would not be shocking at all if Ronald Jones just straight up beats him out in camp, so.
I mean, I think like Ronald Jones running for 1,100 yards and 7-8 touchdowns is very much within the range of potential outcomes. And again, after pick 75 or so, I'm not thinking about the floor case. I'm thinking about what is the upside here. Again, only a few guys every year truly tilt fantasy leagues in the season-long redraft. And I mean, there's an outside chance that Ronald Jones could do that. And therefore, I want to be above ADP on Ronald Jones this year.
The problem is you can't have or you can't mathematically have both CH and Ronald Jones as top 70 picks or top 80 picks, right? Because that's not
mathematically, how it's the math doesn't work, but I'm not, I'm not beholden to the math. Exactly. That's why I'm not a spreadsheet socialist.
All right.
We know that.
Let's go to Leone's hometown. The meatheads who smash the natty ices against their forehead and jump into tables are very excited about James Cook. I am very excited about James Cook. And just simply the case that I have for James Cook is this is going to be probably the number 1 or number 2 team in pass rate over expectation. And James Cook, to me, is the no doubt pass down back. And so to me, that just has a ton of value, period, right there. Leone, the machine, has James Cook down at 110 overall. Evan, very high on James Cook, 61st overall. So Leone, go ahead on your new rookie in Buffalo.
Yeah, I'm struggling with the Buffalo backfield. I kind of like both guys at ADP. I just don't want to be as ahead of ADP as Evan is on a guy. When you're talking the 60s, that's still a pretty premium pick. There's a lot of really high upside wide receivers going there. And this is a back where I don't know what the ceiling case looks like. Is he going to get enough volume, enough of a workload to hit? And I feel like it's going to be one of those things where it's obvious in retrospect where he catches 4 to 5 balls a game and then has 8 carries and is super efficient. We're like, this was definitely going to happen in this offense. But it could also be like he catches 3 balls a game, gets 5 carries, and there's just no way for him to hit any sort of ceiling with that type of volume. So I don't know what's going to happen here. I do think collectively this backfield's underpriced. I thought going into the year that Devin Singletary would be way overvalued based on the way he ended last year, but that doesn't seem the case. If you can get both these guys in the double-digit rounds, I think they're okay, but I don't have a really strong lean on one over the other. Cook's way more exciting, but Singletary does have the history of, okay, we will lean on this guy and give him the massive workload, and sometimes that's all it takes, like we saw down the stretch last year.
I just want to make the point that Buffalo was adamant, like aggressively trying to get a pass catching back. They had the McKissick deal done. I mean, they had the deal done, and McKissick backs out on them. Then they spend the round 2 pick on James Cook. I mean, they clearly wanted to get Devin Singletary off this role.
But the thing for me is, so they're adamant of getting a pass catching back. We don't know how that translates to fantasy, though, necessarily. And sometimes we see this all the time with like beat writers who are like, oh, the team loves this guy. And it's like, yeah, they love him to catch 3 balls a game, which doesn't do anything for us.
It's a great point. And I think I'm probably going to end up capitulating on this one and moving Cook way more towards where Leone has him. At the same time, I'm in agreement with both of you guys that it's not an easy backfield to sort out from a fantasy standpoint. I mean, God, you can envision a scenario where James Cook ends up leading the team in carries and catching like 60 balls. I mean, and in one of the best offenses in the league.
Mm-hmm.
Let me stop you. Yeah. How likely do you think it is that he can lead the team? Do you think James Cook profiles as a base back? Because a lot of people think he's
he's above 200 pounds. He can do that. He's bigger than Devin Singletary is. That's for sure. I think it's within his range of potential outcome. Yeah. But Devin Singletary has been a pretty good runner. He's been literally the worst receiving back in the NFL. I think PFF had him rated in receiving skills among RBs like 99 out of 100 last year. And PFF College had James Cook as like the number 1 receiving back in the entire in all of Division I.
And this might be one where we meet in the middle a little bit. Cook's ADP on Underdog right now is 108. So, it doesn't take much of a bump up from where we have the machine has him to have him as ahead of ADP on Underdog without spending, a premium pick on him where the opportunity cost is a lot higher. And in, home leagues, he's probably going to go way later. The rookies always go a little bit later in the home leagues relative to, these best ball formats.
Another problem for these guys, though, is that Josh Allen is such a stud around the goal line. And I mean, again, what really swings stuff in fantasy football is touchdowns. And, and I know that they're very volatile and they're difficult to predict. And, how many touchdowns a guy scored last year is entirely, non-predictive of what's going to happen in the coming year. But, what is really James Cook's touchdown ceiling in a backfield where Devin Singletary is going to be involved and Josh Allen is heavily involved in scoring position.
Let's go to Justin Fields. I think the machine Leone is pretty low on Bears stuff generally. I just did a podcast, and these guys that I did the podcast with were flabbergasted at our Cole Kmet projection. And I was just like, listen, guys, like, you can project volume to Cole Kmet because they don't have anyone else, but this is going to be really inefficient, we think. And so Fields, to me, is a guy who, like, you're relying so much on upgrading scheme and rushing ability, but that is the kind of quarterback that I want to be on rushing. So machine 177 on Justin Fields, Evan 122 on Justin Fields. I'll give Leone the floor first here.
Yeah, I'm a little bit concerned the pace that Chicago is going to run at, how much they're going to throw. There's some uncertainties here with the new coaching staff. We're also maybe layering in too much the statistics that he had last year in terms of efficiency when the deck was kind of stacked against him as far as, his path to success. And I do want to be in on Fields. So I'm curious what Evan says, because the rushing upside is really appealing, but I just think he's a clear step below the top 10 quarterbacks or so. And 122 for me, like that's too tight of a gap between the high end quarterbacks that I'm really trying to hit on this year. You can get, I think Trey Lance, there's a clear separation between like Trey Lance and Justin Fields, for example. And sure, you can get Lance, I think he's more than 2 rounds better than Justin Fields. So I just think the gap should be wider there. Positionally, I think I have Fields ranked somewhat similar to Evan, but that's to put him at where Evan has him, I think just shows a lot of faith and optimism in the Bears offense and ignores some of the risks, and also maybe just overrates the mid-tier quarterbacks in general relative to the elite quarterbacks, which are starting to separate from mid-tier quarterbacks more meaningfully and more predictably the last couple of seasons. And I don't see that changing this year.
Evan, go ahead.
So I only have, I think, 14 quarterbacks in my top 150, and he's at quarterback 11. I wanted to not have that many quarterbacks in the top 150, to be perfectly frank. And he's toward the end of the quarterbacks that are in the top 150. I think that, I hate the complexion of the Packers or the Bears offense right now from a supporting cast standpoint, and the system is a complete unknown. I mean, Luke Getsy, their OC, was like really third or fourth in the pecking order in terms of control over the offense. I mean, you had Aaron Rodgers, Matt LaFleur, Nathaniel Hackett in Green Bay. Luke Getsy is coming. He was like number 4 in line. So we really don't know. We can't say anything confidently about who Luke Getsy is. They're about to trot out it looks like they're going to start a 5th round pick from Southern Utah at left tackle. And the guy that they were planning to start at right guard, Dakota Dozier, has already been placed on season-ending injured reserve. We know they have like nothing. We have, Velus Jones or whatever at projected to be their number 2 receiver. I mean, it's really bad. The supporting cast stuff is really bad. But it also, that could lead to more playmaking chances for Justin Fields in some scenarios. We know that he is a dynamic dual threat quarterback who can throw the ball vertically. And I mean, he can create big plays in the passing game and with his legs. And I'm also pretty high on Darnell Mooney relative to the field. So I don't know. Again, when I'm looking at these guys, late in the top 150, I'm looking almost purely at upside and not reliability in floor. And so that's sort of my approach to Justin Fields. I wouldn't mind moving him down a little bit, but I think he's still going to end up in my top 150. And you have him at 177. So it wouldn't be that crazy if I have him like in the 140s and then you have him in the 160s or 170s.
Well, one thing I'd say to Leone about using last year's data on Fields, I mean, they gave this kid the Andy Dalton offense. I mean, they gave him no chance. They asked him to run the Andy Dalton offense. They had no RPOs. There was no schemed running. There was no scheme to get him in space. It was like completely like inept what they did to this kid. And so it's tough to use last year's data on him, I think. But yeah, it still doesn't look great this year for his supporting cast.
We're giving him a little bit of a manual bump to account for that. And it's mostly like the passing efficiency. So it's not like we're looking at the raw fantasy points scored. Like that's not the baseline that we're taking from last year. But even still looking at the passing efficiency, I do agree. It's just tough to know what to use because that's the only NFL sample we have on him right now.
Sure. All right. Miles Sanders. I don't know if you guys saw this yesterday. Miles Sanders does not like the fantasy football community. And these guys that are high picks and then struggle, like they get a lot of crap, which please guys, do not give the players directly crap. Like that's pretty pathetic. It was our job to get the right call on Miles Sanders. It's not his job to like take like criticism. It was on us that we had a bad ranking or a bad projection on Miles Sanders. Don't go tweeting at Miles Sanders, but he's obviously seen a ton of this because he's tilting his face off. As soon as fantasy football was mentioned in this interview, you could see his face just like drop. I mean, this dude was pissed. And, he said something to the effect of, what he wanted to say was, I can't score you guys fantasy points if I don't get the ball. And like, don't draft me is basically what he said, insinuating that it's not going to change. Gainwell and Boston Scott. And if they bring back Jordan Howard, they're going to be involved again. So that was like a little bit scary to me. I just think the talent gap between Miles Sanders and these other guys is so wide. But I don't know, Evan. It sounds like Gainwell and Boston Scott are still going to be involved. So there's a big gap here. Machine 71, Evan 40 on Miles Sanders. Very, very, very high on Miles Sanders. Go ahead. We talked about this on the first top 150 that you released, Evan. This was one of the biggest discrepancies. First market also, but go ahead on Miles Sanders.
I think that they're going to be one of the best rushing teams in the league. They have an incredible offensive line. They're going to remain committed to the run. Gainwell, I like him. I mean, I think I'm above ADP on Gainwell too. And he's one of my favorite guys to take favorite late round RBs. Jordan Howard is gone. Miles Sanders is talented. I would say that he's been sort of an underachiever to this point, but he's got a ton of positive touchdown regression coming. He scored 0 TDs last year. He's a guy that the field is way down on, and I think we can capitalize on that. I want to be above ADP, but not so much that it becomes irrational. So I'm going to go and look at this right after this show. I'm going to look at all these guys that we're talking about right after this show, and I'll probably move them down a little bit. But I do want to be above ADP on Miles Sanders. And please do not tweet players about their performances. I mean, no one at ETR does that. I mean, we're adults here, right? But I know that there are a lot of idiots out there doing that shit.
Just tweet at Silva for his outrageous ranking of
tweet at me
40.
for my terrible ranking, please.
Like, this is egregious. You can't take a guy in the beginning of the 4th round who might be a 2-down back, who might not see the high value touches in the passing game or at the goal line. I love Miles Sanders. I'm a Miles Sanders fan, but this is pricing in pure upside and not enough risk. I think
that's fair. That's fair.
There's just too many.
I'm going to move him down. Right? I'm going to capitulate again.
This is, you can't just
apologize.
Let me attack you. Okay, I'm trying to attack you, Silva.
Let's go to Brandon Cooks. This is one that we've talked about a ton in Slack. Evan, 38th overall on Brandon Cooks machine, 63rd. My big thing is people underrate Davis Mills. And like Mikko Collins is like in these deeper formats, like if you're playing 18, 20, 24 rounds, like Mikko Collins I like. But anyways, Brandon Cooks, 38th overall is very high, Evan. But I also think that Brandon Cooks, Leone is underrating Brandon Cooks' ability here. We've discussed it. I know we've bumped up Brandon Cooks a ton. If it was up to Leone, we'd have Brandon Cooks even lower than 63rd overall. So go ahead on your Brandon Cooks hate, Leone.
Yeah, no, I mean, I'll admit sometimes the reputation that I have of liking old, boring players and liking players that just project for a lot of volume sometimes gets to me. So I may have overcompensated with Brandon Cooks and been a little bit lighter initially on him. But the problem is, since we moved him up, the market and Evan have gotten even more aggressive on him. And I think he's at a point where I just don't know if he has the ceiling to match the other guys. And I am one of those people that maybe does underrate Davis Mills. Like, I'm really concerned about this offense. It admittedly was better than I expected last year, which was not a high bar, but I'm still worried that this could just be a train wreck for Houston. And, you know, over the entire course of the season, receiver like the talent of his peak years, you know, we're really counting on a high volume from a questionable quarterback. That gives me definite concerns. Yeah, I'd much rather have him in round 6. Like, he's the type of guy in round 6, stable dude in round 6. Like, if I'm having him in round 4, I think I'm swinging for the fences a little bit more. Some guys that have more ceiling, like, you know, a Jerry Jeudy type or Marquise Brown or something like that.
Yep. Evan, go ahead on Brandon Cooks.
I definitely don't think that Jerry Jeudy has more upside than
way more upside.
No, it's not.
Oh my God, it's not even close.
Yeah. But you know, you were wrong about Brandon Cooks last year. I was right, and it looks like you're going to be wrong again. I'll be right again. Look at his target competition in Houston. I don't even know if we are underrating Davis Mills. I just think that Davis Mills has shown that he can be a competent quarterback. Maybe his ceiling is like Jared Goff range. But he's good enough to deliver the ball to the number one receiver, and that's Brandon Cooks by a long shot. Okay, Mikko Collins, I kind of like him as a last-ditch best ball pick, but that's what he is. John Mechie is coming off a severe late-season knee injury, and he's 5'11", 187, possession receiver. Okay, Brandon Cooks has gone for over 1,000 yards in 6 of his last 7 seasons. He's been highly productive on a consistent basis, and he's not old. He's 28 years old, and he's not boring. I mean, maybe you should watch some Brandon Cooks tape, Leone. All right, because he's not boring.
Like, his first half of the season, he definitely was targeted at a higher rate than the second half, and maybe I'm just leaning on that. I mean, the second half wasn't bad, but first half he came out. I remember we bet against him in the props, and we just got freaking killed a couple weeks because he turned out, 48% target share, 39% targets, 33% target share, 30% target share. So, like, out of the gate, he was insane. He was much more tame, more like a low to mid 20s guy the second half of the season. And that's my expectation moving forward.
Let's go to Michael Pittman. Yeah, this one is tough, man. Evan has Michael Pittman 27. Machine has 44. I like Michael Pittman. I think there's concerns about Matt Ryan. I think there's concerns about pass rate for this offense. And I think there's some concerns that, like, Michael Pittman is not a truly elite talent to be ranked 27th overall. But, man, the opportunity is certainly there. I mean, we're going to have Alec Pierce competing against Paris Campbell to be the wide receiver too, and they don't really have, like, any much explosive stuff beyond that. So, Evan, 27 is very high Michael Pittman? Go ahead on that. Then I'll let Leone respond.
I mean, this is he's going to be a guy that I'm bullish on this year. Like I'm, pushing the chips in on Michael Pittman. Took a big step last year. You're out here tweeting about Paris Campbell. I mean, that's that's kind of pathetic. Okay. I mean, that's his target competition. We don't know what's going to happen at tight end. I mean, I guess it's going to be Mo Alley Cox.
Yeah.
Maybe. I'm not worried about Matt Ryan. I think Matt Ryan is a definite upgrade from what they've had the last couple of years. And so he plays indoors. He's the clear-cut alpha. And his trajectory, I mean, he took a really big step last year. I think he can take another big step. He can win at all three levels. He's good after the catch. He can win contested. I mean, I don't know. I think you're way too low on him, Leone.
See, all the guys like Evan, they have to make these tape arguments about how good Michael Pittman is because the math just doesn't work. We don't hate Michael Pittman, but at a 24-25% target share, which is really high for a base target share for a wide receiver, he just doesn't get spit out that high. It's okay quarterback play. It's on a team that's going to be run heavy. We're projecting them to pass more than they did last year, but they're still going to be one of the more run heavy teams in the league. Like, full stop. That is not changing just because you go from Carson Wentz to Matt Ryan. So it's just really difficult to make the math work unless he's insanely good, which maybe, Evan's arguing we're not baking that possibility in enough. But for me, I think it's a classic case of player I like, but he's just being drafted too early.
That's why sometimes you need to just grab the spreadsheet and just fucking tear it and just make the pick, just take the guy who can win contested catches. All right.
Yeah. That's the PSM model. We have the PSM model for that. I mean, exactly. Okay. That's going to do it for guys that Evan is higher on than the machine. Now, here are a few guys that both the machine and Evan are higher on than market. J.K. Dobbins is the first one. And this is one that I think is super interesting because so much is related to reports. And a lot of these reports are coming from Twitter doctors. And with all due respect to Twitter doctors, none of them have actually examined J.K. Dobbins. What we do know for a fact about J.K. Dobbins is he did not participate in practice at OTAs. And John Harbaugh started to show some concern about that, I guess, on him and Gus Edwards both not participating in practice when they allegedly should have. But man, timelines on J.K. Dobbins, normal timelines should be good. And this is going to be an outrageously run-heavy offense, I think, with getting Lamar back in there and all that. So I agree with both of you guys that this is a good time to buy a dip on J.K. Dobbins while there's fear around his injury. Leone, go ahead on how you're thinking about J.K. Dobbins and health.
Yeah, I mean, it's definitely difficult to know exactly how to quantify the injury risk because and on one hand, it happened so early that we'd expect him to be ready. On the other hand, it was a more severe injury than your average ACL tear. But ultimately, we're getting such a discount because of the uncertainty there that I want to buy into it. His underdog ADP right now is 56 overall, which we're getting into the fifth round, at the middle of the fifth round, the tail end of the fifth round. And if you haven't invested in running back early in your draft, this isn't your typical dead zone running back. This is someone people are scared of because of the injury, but he's someone that has a lot of talent and is on an offense that's going to be good and efficient and is pretty insulated as far as, a floor standpoint. So I'm taking the gamble here on J.K. Dobbins. I'd much rather take the gamble on someone like Dobbins, who we know has the talent and the support around him, and we just hope the health is there, versus someone that just doesn't have the talent or is on an offense where the bottom could completely drop out.
Yep.
Yeah. And I mean, it's fun to play up the disagreements between Leone and I, and that it's fun. And that's what makes for that's what gets the clicks. But we agree on J.K. Dobbins. I think I have him RB22 somewhere in that range. And I feel fine about that. And I'm very willing to adjust if when we get to training camp, we get more negative news. For now, I think RB22 is the perfect place to have him.
Okay, two more that you both are, or one more that you're both higher on and one more that you're lower on. I'll throw the Gabe Davis, Leone, and then I want Evan to talk about Najee Harris. On Gabe Davis, Leone, where both Evan and the machine are higher on Gabe Davis than market. The argument from, I guess, Gabe Davis detractors is that he was never able to separate from people like Emmanuel Sanders and Cole Beasley until very, very late last year. I think that's kind of a weak argument. He's an ascending player. Obviously, they believe in him. Now, I think he's going to be out there every single snap. But yeah, what do you say to the detractors on Gabe Davis?
Yeah, I think there's two sides of this. One, on the floor side, I think it's much higher than people realize because the offense is so good and they throw at such a high rate. And it's not like Gabe Davis is going to be buried on the bench. Maybe he doesn't play as big of a role that we think, but in games that either, Cole Beasley or Manny Sanders missed last year, the opportunities were there. He was on the field. He was fine. And then from a ceiling perspective, Adam, they had all these wide receivers healthy when they got to the very end of the season. And I remember we hit big on Gabe Davis in the Kansas City game because we had saw in that wild card game that mattered. He played every single snap. He led the wide receivers in snaps while the first team was out there. And somehow that got missed a little bit. But they clearly thought he was their best talent last year. He's got another full offseason ahead of him. I mean, I think the odds he outscores Stephon Diggs aren't even that crazy. And if that happens, Gabe Davis is putting together an absolutely stunning league winning season. We're higher than ADP on him. ADP starting to rise. And I could honestly see us being too low on him as high as we are because I really am that bullish on Gabe Davis.
Completely agree. I mean, I think he's a stud. I've always liked him. It makes sense that, they kind of eased him in. They brought in a savvy veteran in Emmanuel Sanders, and they had Cole Beasley, who really was a solid slot receiver. Both of those guys now gone. The only really somewhat significant Bills receiver addition they did bring back Isaiah McKenzie was Jamison Crowder, who I do like as a late round pick, but clearly does not have the big time scoring ability that Gabriel Davis has flashed.
They didn't replace Manny. Crowder is 1-for-1 for Beasley, and they didn't replace Manny on the outside.
Right. And then they did draft a kid, an interesting kid, Shakir, I think, in the 5th round. Yeah. And he'll be a dude to watch in preseason. But Gabriel Davis, I think Josh Norris described it perfectly. He said the runway has been cleared for Gabriel Davis. The Bills are showing their commitment in him. I mean, I thought that there was a chance they might take a receiver on maybe even at the end of the 1st round. Certainly on day 2, they did not. And the runway has been cleared for Gabriel Davis. I think wide receiver 22. If his ADP starts to move up, I would not be afraid to move him up because I want to get Gabriel Davis this year in my drafts.
Yeah, I think in more casual formats, Gabe Davis will go a little bit later. I think the peak virgin stuff that's going on right now and people drafting now are having no sex and they're high on Gabe Davis. It'll come down.
No sex at all. And it's been a beautiful summer.
last guy to get to here. Both of you are lower than market on Najee Harris. Evan, I'll let you start here. We've talked plenty about offensive line and overall offensive scheme. I think with Ben gone, there's some more paths to this offense actually being really good. So go ahead on Najee.
Well, I don't think there's many paths to the offense being really good. Right. But I think their quarterback situation will probably be better this year, even if they play some quarterback carousel with Trubisky and Pickett. The offensive line is terrible. I mean, we talked about this in our recent show. PFF put out their offensive line rankings. Brandon Thorne will have his offensive line rankings in our draft kit at some point in the relatively near future. But in the PFF offensive line rankings, the Steelers were 30th. I expect him to have a bottom 5 offensive line. That can be an overrated element of for a running back's fantasy projection. And I would say that it actually definitely is, but it's not helping. And he's not a big play runner. He's going to be a low efficiency runner. Last year he had 307 carries, only 4 went for longer than 20 yards. He's going to have to catch a lot of passes. I don't think he's going to catch as many passes this year as he did last year because that was so conducive to the way that Ben just wanted to get – he didn't want to get hit. He wanted to get the ball out. He knew he was on his last legs. He retires. They're going to run the ball more this year. That's not actually a positive for Najee Harris. He's not going to hit long runs. I don't think they're going to score a lot of points. So, look, he's going to get 1 million touches. He absolutely could lead the NFL in touches, and he is a first, second round fantasy pick, no question. But he's a guy that I'm leaning, when I'm breaking ties, I'm drafting the other guy, Dalvin Cook, that type of player. I'd much rather have Dalvin Cook this year than Najee Harris. You're muted again.
You're muted.
Yeah, Tech Lord.
Jesus. Anything to add on Najee there, Leone?
Just, there's two types of skill for a player, and Najee Harris definitely has skill in terms of the ability to handle a full workload and to be trusted in all situations. And I think that's a legitimate talent that not all backs have. But I do kind of worry about the big play upside from him. And if you don't have that, especially on an offense that we're a little bit bearish on, you have some systemic risk because you're just dependent on so many touches and you're dependent on the offense continuing to support those touches. So he's fine. He projects fine. It just, like Evan said, I kind of go in tiebreakers the other way because I don't know if that's the type of bet you want to make that early in the draft.
All right. Perfect. You're muted, Evan. We have a mute fest going on.
And that's kind of the way to think about first and second round picks because it's really so tight up top that you're just like, how am I going to break this tie? And I'm going to usually lean away from Najee Harris when I'm on the clock in those rounds.
All right. That's going to do it for part 1 of Man versus Machine. Part 2 will feature players that the machine is higher on than man. Stay tuned for that coming up soon. For Evan, for Leone, for producer Luke, I am Adam. Good luck, everybody.